Name, Facebook Live interview.
Yep.
Now.
Yep. Hi, everyone. This is Nancy Reyes with For Your Canine.
And Joanne Soike with For Better, For Worse.
Let us know you're out there in the comments. Tonight, we have a special treat. One of the things we're really interested in that's important for our animals' well-being is their hearing. So this is something that we are really passionate about. And tonight we have Dr. Pete Scheifele from the University of Cincinnati FETCHLAB. So welcome. Thank you for being here tonight. Hi, everyone. Everybody's showing up. Excellent. So we wanted to kind of, there's so much information that you have, but we'll try to get to the highlights, Dr. Scheifele.
Okay.
So I know we were asking you a little bit or before we went on the air. How did you get into the field of audiology? And tell us a little bit about your background with audiology.
Well, okay, I teach in the medical school at the University of Cincinnati, and I also have a degree in animal sciences as well as speech and hearing science. So when I started to teach, I wanted to open up a lab and do something with audiology. And, sometimes a lot of medical research gets done, with animals, but I saw an opportunity to help animals as well as do research that was non-invasive. And the premise was that I know from being in medical school that we don't get audiology as MDs, and vets don't get it either. There's not enough time in the curriculum to do that. Vets and docs are real good with pathologies of the ear and what have you, but not with the acoustics and hearing. So it occurred to me that, my audiology students are working in the operating room and working with ENTs. And I thought, well, if they can work with an ENT, why not work with a vet? And so going around and checking, I find out that a lot of vets don't really, know a lot about audiology. Some people are still doing the old, jangle the keys trick to figure out if the dog can hear something. But there's a lot more to audiology. I mean, it takes 3 years for an audiologist to become an audiologist and get licensed. So,
wow.
So that's why I started FETCHLAB. And lo and behold, it turns out that in the United States, there are 80 breeds of dogs that suffer from congenital deafness. The top breed being Dalmatians. 1 out of 5 Dalmatians in the United States will be born either unilaterally or bilaterally deaf. But there are 80 breeds, and it's very similar in the UK and Europe as well. So now many people, breeders, are coming in to get their puppies tested and get the sire and the dam tested, because it's the only way that we can sort of get rid of the genetics by not breeding deaf dogs. And so I found myself suddenly, with I'm already booked into February, and we see puppies every Friday. And now we're starting to see more and more older dogs that are coming in. I'm not really sure. I think it's just that people now have become aware that dogs suffer deafness from different reasons. And part of it may be we have a program going on where I've developed hearing protection devices for the military that we're using and now can be bought commercially. But we have been working on putting hearing aids on dogs. I put hearing aids on 9 dogs so far. And at least once a month, I'll get either a phone call from anywhere in the world or an email that says, I think my dog can't hear. Could you put a hearing aid on it? So that's how FETCHLAB began, and that's what we're doing. So wow. FETCHLAB is mostly comprised of audiologists, actual people audiologists, doctors, and animal scientists, and we have an animal behaviorist as well. So that's who we are.
That is awesome. So one of my questions, I know you had alluded to this, because this is that how is dogs' hearing different from our hearing, or is it different at all?
it is different, but only in the effect, as I was saying before, any hearing loss that a human being can suffer, a dog can suffer. Right across the board. It doesn't matter whether it's a loss of hearing with age, which we call presbycusis, or whether it's a noise-induced hearing loss, a conductive hearing loss, a congenital hearing loss. The dog can suffer the same thing. Where things get a little bit different is that the dog's range of hearing, its hearing threshold, is different than that of a human. So they may show signs and symptoms that are a little bit different than what a human would suffer or show. But basically, the hearing loss is a hearing loss is a hearing loss. It's all the same.
So some of the things that we notice as dogs age, they may get a little more sensitive to, say, thunderstorms or fireworks or loss of high pitch. Is that kind of the same in humans, or is that more specific to dog, or just aging in general?
I would say that by what you're describing, it's a little bit more prevalent in dogs. Usually, for us humans, and it's just the similarity with dogs is that as a dog gets older, as a human gets older, they may or may not lose their hearing or some portion of their hearing. But becoming more sensitive to different frequencies, we don't tend to see that as much in humans as we do in dogs. I have seen dogs, especially those that are military, that go overseas and deploy for operations and come back, show evidence of hyperacusis, which people get, and that is where it's like having a really bad hangover. It's like when people talk to you in a normal tone of voice, to the person that has the hyperacusis or the dog that has the hyperacusis, every sound sounds annoyingly loud, galactically loud, and so they will respond to that accordingly. And if it's not treated, eventually they will start to have auditory hallucinations. So we see that. I haven't seen it a lot in pet dogs, but I've heard it happen. But even though we see hyperacusis in humans, it's not the same. Now, I will tell you this. Now, when it comes down to specific frequency loss, so you can have a hearing loss that is, kind of across the board. Sometimes, though, a human or a dog can get a hearing loss to certain frequencies. So I've had now probably 4 or 5 people that have come to the lab to have their border collie tested. And so these are people that are doing herding. Mm-hmm. And so when we test, what we find out is that, they'll come, usually the routine is they come in and go, my dog is not responding to the whistle, looks confused or whatever like that. So we'll test its hearing outright, first of all. And if the dog has a hearing loss in both ears, then we have to figure out if it's going to be a hearing aid candidate or just can't do anything about it. Sometimes it'll be where the dog has a loss in one ear, a unilateral loss. And it may not be profound. It may be a moderate or to a severe loss. But just like people, if a dog has a unilateral loss in one ear, whether it's moderate or severe, and you put that dog into any kind of a situation where there's background noise, they cannot localize where the sound is coming from, meaning they're not going to get where the whistle sound came from, and they're not going to respond to it unless they happen to be oriented towards it. But more times than not, at least in the cases that I've had recently, what we found out is that the dog was not responding to the frequency of the whistle. So we just had the owner change the frequency of the whistle that they're using. The dog went right back and did herding just like nothing ever happened. So it can vary.
So do you find so this is a question that wasn't on the list, but dogs that tend to be more hearing sensitive or noise sensitive, that when they're, and do you find that that's a genetic thing? Because there are dogs that as puppies show noise sensitivity, sound and all that, and what causes it? Is it genetic, and what causes it? And is it similar to that where with the border collie, they can hear certain things, or if they're, or like that hyper with the loudness and the pitch up for the dogs that come from the helicopter ride or whatever. Is that similar to what happens to some of these dogs? Because from a training perspective, a dog that tends to have that little bit of noise sensitivity, I mean, I've seen noise sensitivity very low to pretty high noise sensitivity, that anything that happens, down the street, the dog can't function inside because it's, because they heard that noise, or they were aware of that noise.
Right. So that's a really tough question to answer. I can't say with certainty that this is a genetic problem. It could be. It could also be that the dog, for one reason or another, is becoming hyperacusive and so is going down that path. That could be because of the environment that the dog is in. It could be an exposure that the dog had that was a very loud exposure. It's really hard to say, but I just can't say that, yeah, that's a genetic thing. It could be. It certainly could be, just like congenital deafness can be.
Right. Well, just like, and I'm talking specific, like 8-week-old puppies, we see that noise sensitivity really early on, where they haven't, and these are, breeders that take pretty good care of the puppies, and they don't have any, they haven't had any of that, they haven't been raised in a kennel, it's been in a home and it's been quiet. So that's why, and you notice that the mother or the father has noise sensitivity. So, right. So, dogs that are a little older, it's hard to say, but for young dogs, because then when you go to select a dog for performance, whatever it may be, obedience or agility or whatever, that noise sensitivity can become a problem as the dog gets older, because, it's not, it's having a hard time dealing with the environment in that space, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so the way you're describing it, for a pup that young, it may very well be a sensitivity that is passed down from sire or dam, or it may be a congenital thing. I don't think that a lot of work, to my knowledge, has been done to try to figure out whether or not that is a part of congenital. Most of the cards have been laid on the table for congenital deafness, but right. I don't think a lot of work has been done on the hyperacusive aspect.
And for hyperacusive, which is probably sounds like what it is, how it's just figuring out what, because for some of the dogs that are just so sensitive to it and they just aren't resilient to it, is it just something that, is there something hearing wise that people can do for that dog that tends to be, very noise sensitive and very aware of that, of all the noises and things like that, which is really scary for a lot of them. You know what I mean? When they go out.
I mean, the only thing that, that where we are at this point right now is using hearing protection on the dog. There are some products I know that are out there that try to calm the dogs by using playing certain tones or sounds or things like that. Mm-hmm. Typically, the advice would be, get some hearing protection for the dog. Mm-hmm. And that's just where we are at this point in time.
Right. Well, that makes sense. So the hearing protection, what kind of hearing protection is available for Joe pet owner, or if there is any, or is there any on the horizon, I guess?
Earmuffs.
Yeah, there are, if you go online, there are a number of products that are out there, for hearing protection. The ones that we use now with the military, which, as you say, Joe pet owner can get, is with Rec Specs, and it's a hearing protection device that I developed that is now used by the Department of Defense for military working dogs, and specifically ones that are going to be, riding in fixed wing aircraft or being transported in trucks or in a helicopter or something like that. But anybody can get them now. Rec Specs is the name of the place that that took the development, the ones that I develop, and they're selling them. But if you go online, there's probably 3 or 4 different kinds that you could get.
Rex Pets or Specs?
Yeah. So Rex Specs. So REXSPECS. Rex Specs are actually the goggle
Yes.
that the dogs wear, but the Rex Specs hearing protection device now is there, and it's relatively new, and so yeah, those are the people that are dealing with it outside of military.
Okay. All right.
Interesting.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. So I know Nancy and I have had a lot of discussions, especially even online, trying to talk about how does a dog's hearing actually change as they age. And can you talk about that, like just from a autonomy, what is it does the hair just get less sensitive? I mean, what happens?
Okay, so again, I'll preface this by saying that presbycusis, that's deafness with age, is the same for a dog as it is for a human being. Not every dog is going to get it, just like not every, you have 95-year-old people whose hearing is, perfect. And, then you have other people that very rapidly lose hearing in one or both ears. The loss of hearing with age occurs for a lot of different reasons, but primarily your ear and the dog's ear, the inner ear and middle ear, are basically mechanical devices. So the way that a dog hears, or a human, is the pressure waves of sound that are made in air get funneled into the ear canal. The eardrum or tympanic membrane vibrates, which moves 3 bones, ossicles, that translate that pressure wave in air into a mechanical wave that creates a fluid wave in the cochlea, the inner ear, and that fluid wave excites hair cells. Now you have 2 different kinds of hair cells, inner and outer. The inner hair cells is what actually allows the person or dog to actually hear something. The outer hair cells amplify that signal to make it strong enough so that when the hair cell moves and creates now an electrical signal that goes to the brain, that's when the processing takes place and you perceive the sound. As you get older, those hair cells become fatigued, and eventually they can wear out. Now, if you are a person, not to show my age or anything, but if you've been to too many Jimi Hendrix concerts, you come out of there and your hair cells have been damaged. They've been fatigued, and the more you subject yourself to noise over your lifetime, because the hair cells are just mechanical devices, the more susceptible they're going to be to fatigue. Now, in a case where you have grown up in a loud environment, or you've had drugs that are ototoxic, and for a myriad of other reasons, eventually the hair cells will either break off, or they will totally fatigue and not be able to come back to their rightful standing position, and so then you start to lose your hearing, and eventually it can go to the point where you are profoundly deaf. And that is exactly what happens to the dog. So we know, for instance, right now, I did a paper a long time ago about kennels. So, if a commercial kennel, or a kennel like, I don't know, one of the rescue societies or whatever like that, kennels are built to be cleaned. And this goes back to something that we spoke about a little bit before we came online. Look, audiology, not to put too fine a point on it, audiology is at the bottom of the totem pole. Even people don't worry about losing their hearing until it's too late. Mm-hmm. And so we find that dogs that have been in a kennel that have a concrete floor, probably concrete or concrete block walls, maybe a corrugated ceiling, a lot of fencing. There's a lot of reverberation in there, and those dogs will suffer the consequences, which is going to have a hearing loss. In a number of kennels that I've been to, including military kennels, when I go in and I get asked to, to mitigate the noise or whatever, and I take a 24-hour reading, at certain times of the day, by federal law, the handlers are not even supposed to be in there. The noise level is so high above the federal standards that you can't even work in that environment, much less a dog who's going to be in there 24/7. So yes, they will lose their hearing. That's one of the issues. And again, it's that kind of fatigue of the inner and outer hair cells in the cochlea of the ear, and that's the same whether you're a dog or a human. The only thing that changes is the dogs have, like I say, a different frequency regime than we do.
Wow, I never even, because that makes me think of so many dogs that are at the humane societies for their whole lives. That must be rough.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, because most of our dogs live in a relatively quiet environment for the most part.
Yeah, if they're living at home.
Yeah.
But it all depends too. Now you have dogs that live at home, and we'll make the assumption that most homes are relatively not loud. Okay. But then, if you've got, hunting dogs, you shoot over these dogs. And here's the thing. If I have any message that I could get across to the viewers, it is this. When we talk about hearing loss, when people talk about hearing loss, usually what they say is they hang on to, I'm getting a hearing loss because I'm exposed to a loud sound. Well, in actuality, I will tell you this. It takes three things to get a hearing loss, and you have to have all three. You can't have one. It's not just loudness. It doesn't work that way. The three things are as follows. One, whatever the sound is that you're being exposed to has to be at a frequency that your ear is capable of hearing. So as an example, we now are, we're very conscious about the environment and about making electricity. So we make windmills, okay? Well, when that rotor goes around on a windmill, it basically puts out a 2 to 5 hertz frequency signal. We don't have the capacity to hear that. No human being is ever going to hear that because your ear doesn't have the functionality for those low frequencies, and neither does a dog's ear. However, if you live next to that windmill and it's going around and producing these frequencies all the time, eventually your nervous system will get attacked by those frequencies. You don't have to hear it, but the nervous system will pick it up. And then what happens is you'll start having problems sleeping, get insomnia, then you'll get a cold, then you'll get the flu, then you'll get pneumonia. I mean, in Scotland, whole herds of sheep have been killed off by windmills. So it's a matter of where you put them. So one, you have to be capable of hearing the frequency that you're exposed to. Two, it has to be loud enough to do some damage to those hair cells. But the third is where we really come into it. It's not only the frequency and the loudness, but how long you or the dog were exposed to that loudness of sound.
Sure.
So as an example, if you are exposed to a, 70 decibel sound, then you can, let's look. Federal law tells us that if you're exposed to 90 decibels, you can only be exposed for 8 hours, and you mandatorily have to have hearing protection. So that means after 8 hours, you have a problem. On the other hand, if I were to expose a room of people to a sound that was 120 decibels or longer or higher, then I can cause temporary deafness on the spot. Okay, at 140 decibels, you'd be feeling some fuzz around your face and on your arms because that's the threshold of feeling, and now you're headed to the threshold of pain. So you have to have all three of these things in order for you to have a hearing loss. And the dog is the same way. That's why I say if you have a dog that's in a kennel and that kennel noise is over 90 decibels on a routine basis and the dog is in there all the time, yeah, the dog's going to have a hearing loss. There's no doubt about it.
So what's the equivalent of 90 decibels, for example? Is that like a concert?
90 decibels would be, you'd have to be pretty well screaming.
Okay.
It would have to be a constant scream, way louder than you would ever be talking to somebody. Your typical firework on the 4th of July, if you're within 100 yards of it, the fireworks are going off probably at about 150 decibels.
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and the further you move away from it, of course, the less intense it gets by virtue of distance. So yeah, I mean, and that's a problem when we have people that want to have a hearing aid on their dog, is if the dog can't hear a sound, if he can't just detect the sound until 90 decibels, there isn't a hearing aid in the world that's going to amplify enough to help that out. And the problem is that, like I said, hearing is at the bottom of the pile. We don't recognize symptoms very easily, or we dismiss them. People, and we're all, it's a common fault that we just have as humans, is that, but you guys as trainers know that typically by the time an owner recognizes that the dog has some kind of a serious hearing problem, then they have a serious hearing problem. And 9 times out of 10, they're not going to be a candidate for a canine hearing aid.
Mm-hmm.
You've already lost too much.
Right.
So you have to kind of be on your guard to look at these things, and to know your dog well. But again, if you're a hunter and the dog is being shot over, then that is that's the same as kenneling it, and in a way.
Right.
So it depends on the environment, really does.
So one of our questions actually was, would your rec specs be something that might help a dog who's exposed to gunshots?
Yes, they were designed. That hearing protection device was designed for military special working dogs that are being exposed to gunfire explosions, exposed to gunfire on the range, and exposed to a lot of helo flights. So yes, absolutely. And I already have some hunters that are using them. Actually, we tested them on some dogs that were used for hunting.
Oh, cool.
Nice.
I think so. Somebody, Dee asked, that is the TV turned up high? Is that like 90 decibels? It's like, no, it's got to be a TV. A really loud TV is not 90 decibels.
If you to bring your TV up to the point where it's 90 decibels, I can almost assure you don't want to be in that room, and you're not going to want to be in that room. You're going to be like, turn it down. It's just, yeah. I mean, behaviorally, even unless you have a hearing loss, yeah, at 90 decibels, no, you're not going to want to be there.
Yeah, Joe made a comment though, makes me wonder, the grooming dryers at, say, a groom shop for the dogs that have to sit there all day. Would that be borderline maybe, or not sure?
The grooming dryers now fall into the category of what I was just saying. So if the dryer is most likely, I'm guessing, not at 90 dB.
No.
But now the question is, let's say the dryer, and I would accept, not having tested it, but I would accept that a dryer maybe is going off at 70 decibels. Okay. That in itself wouldn't cause a hearing loss, except for, remember that third thing, duration. How long is that dog exposed to that dryer, and how close to the dryer is that dog's head? That's when the problem comes in. So it's not, in that case, it's not so much about how loud it is, it's how long the exposure is.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, because that totally makes sense. Somebody had a question about dog getting
tinnitus,
just like people. you know, I mean, that's hard to know, right? Because that's a ringing.
Yeah. So I can tell you this, in human audiology right now, and it doesn't matter whether you are, whether it's an insurance issue or a workman's comp issue, we have no way of actually telling if a person has tinnitus. There's no test. It is a self-diagnosed problem. And so if a person comes in and says, you know, I have tinnitus, tinnitus is absolutely real. And there's a test that we can run that sort of tells us a little bit. It's called an otoacoustic emission. It sort of tells us a little something, but it doesn't answer the whole question. And so different organizations, and I think for many of the states in the union, workman's comp will tell you that you have to, if you're going to say that you have tinnitus, they go by what the VA rules that they go by, and so there's a whole bunch of things that have to be presented on the plate as evidence. Like it has to be affect your work. You have to someone in your family that knows you well has to know that you've had it. There's behavioral things that go on, but since we can't diagnose it, you know, readily, I'm absolutely certain that dogs can have tinnitus, but I also but there's no way for us to tell. We're not that far.
Yeah, and it's hard for us to like when people get it, they can tell you, hey, I'm having this. Dogs it'd be hard for them to let us know, hey, this is happening. So there's a lot of questions. So so what Aaron asks is the hearing aid implanted in the dog, or is it like, I mean, I know there's in humans, you can have an implant, or you can have just a regular hearing aid that you can take on and off. What is your hearing aid?
Okay, so the hearing aid is not a cochlear implant. Okay, cochlear implant's entirely different. The actual first cochlear implant, when they were trying to figure out if they work, was actually done on a cat. But people don't do cochlear implants on dogs. First of all, cochlear implant, you're looking at $50,000 to have it done, and that's for a human. And there's a lot to it that doesn't work well with animals, at least not yet. Hearing aids, presently, if I put a hearing aid on a dog, it is a human hearing aid. But although I've been given a grant now to work on creating a purely canine hearing aid that will be affordable by pet owners, because human hearing aids that we put on. So the first one I ever did was a dog that we owned, and he was doing a lot of TV work and things like that. And as he got older, when he got to be about 14, he wasn't picking up verbal cues, and he was confounded and not very happy with it. And so that was the first time I said, well, you know, let's put a hearing aid on him. So we put a human hearing aid on him, and eventually it worked, and he wore it, you know, until the time that he passed. But it's a human hearing aid, and the dog doesn't need everything that we have in our human hearing aids right now. So because of the hearing differences and stuff, you know, that's what we're working on. So no, it's not implanted. The ones that we use, the last hearing aid that I put on a dog was from Austin, Texas. The dog does search and rescue. And we used a wireless hearing aid. So it's little earbuds that go into the dog's ear. That's the hearing aid itself. The power pack is on the collar of the dog, and it's wireless. And then even with that, we use a little jewelry chain attached to the collar, because if the dog shakes it out, you know, you don't want to lose your hearing aid. Sure. So that the first dog that we had what we call BTE, or behind the ear hearing aid. It's the kind that we're used to seeing with the tubes that come. Mm-hmm. So the two pieces that would normally go behind the ear were on a special collar, and then the tubes ran from that to the dog's ear.
Okay.
So you know, we've come a long way since then, now that we have wireless hearing aids. And I have to tell you, it's kind of a funny thing. When we fashion hearing aids for it, the dog comes in and, you know, we do all the testing. And then if we're going to do a hearing aid, we have to pour ear molds because the hearing aid itself is fashioned for that dog. And so I took the ear impressions, took the ear molds, and sent it off to the hearing aid company, like we would do for a human. Well, and the next day, I got a call from the hearing aid tech, and he said, I don't know, what is this that you sent me? And I said, well, you know, they're molds for a hearing aid. And he said, this doesn't look like any mold I've ever seen. And I said, oh, well, I forgot to tell you, it's for a dog. He's like, a dog? Are you kidding me? And so we've learned in the time that we have to label them to up, down, right, left, and everything, because it's just, you know, they look at the ear canal and they're like, what in the hell is this?
That's great. That's so awesome.
The other thing I want to tell you, and for everybody that is listening out there, because I do get a lot of people wanting to do hearing aids, and it requires us to test the dog. We have to do special testing and to see if the dog is a candidate and whether the owner is a candidate. Now, this comes into, you know, Joanne and Nancy, what you guys do. If a dog is going to be wearing hearing aids, you can't just slap hearing aids on a dog. One, they're not going to want it in their ear, and there's going to be a whole host of issues with putting any kind of probe or anything in the dog's ear. Not only from the point of view of the dog not wanting it, but also from the point of view that if you don't get it in there right, you might as well not put anything in there at all. That even goes for hearing protection. So, so the point is that, you know, what I get typically every month are people that will write and say, I think my dog is losing its hearing. I really feel bad. Maybe it's also losing its sight. I really feel bad, and I want to see if you would put a hearing aid on my dog, you know, to give it a good quality of life. And the first response that I have to that is, if you are that good of a pet owner that you are contacting me to put a hearing aid on your dog, which is going to cost you a lot of money, then that dog already has a good quality of life. You are a good owner,
Right.
and you're giving that dog everything that you can. My putting a hearing aid on it isn't going to change the dog's quality of life. And the other thing too is, and you'll be surprised, people even think this, the number of people that come into you know, the medical, and the audiologist says you need a hearing aid, and they want to have a hearing aid, but they also have the belief that, gee, when I get this hearing aid, everything's going to go back to the way it was. Life is going to be grand. You know, this is the magic bullet. It's not a magic bullet. And no, life isn't going to go back to the way that it was. You're never going to hear what you heard before you needed a hearing aid. And so we find that even with military dogs, if we're giving the dog, let's say, a command that is going to be over electronics, you know, over a speaker or something, the dog needs to be retrained to get a command that is not directly from the handler, because it knows the tone quality of the handler's voice. And as you know, I tell this to all my medical school students, and most of them laugh, but some of them are stupefied. Look, you know, if you like the sound of your voice, if you sing in the shower and you think, you know, you're, I don't know, Beyonce or whoever the heck she is, you know, don't quit your day job. Because if you've ever heard yourself on a tape recorder, you sound terrible. Yeah. I mean, you know, and the reason is because when you hear yourself talk and you hear yourself sing, the vibrations of your skull are putting in all of the mid and high frequencies. When you're talking into a phone or something like that, your head's not doing any of that. So you're missing a bunch of frequencies and you sound bloody horrible. So don't, you know, so yeah, there are changes. And there are changes when you put a hearing aid on somebody.
Well, yeah, because that's why. Well, I know people who wear hearing aids and they don't, you know, they don't hear like they did. They still struggle with some things.
Yeah, yeah, and noise presents a problem. It always has presented a problem that you have hearing aids. The number of people that have hearing aids and then they'll go out to a pub or they'll go to dinner and there's a lot of people talking. I can't tell you the number of elderly people that will just turn them off.
Yes. Yeah.
It's annoying.
Yeah, the technology now allows you to control that, right? I work with a guy who, like, he can answer his phone on his hearing aid, and he can control like left, right.
Yep, the new technologies will have automatic tone control that will sense if you are in a noisy environment and things like that. I mean, the new technologies right now, the hearing aid we have hearing aids now that will register your heartbeat, the number of steps you take every day. You know, you name it, we can do it. So yeah, but unfortunately, a dog doesn't really need all of that. So and so, you know, the whole idea of getting this grant to work on a specific canine hearing aid is because right now, if somebody comes in and I test their dog and the dog is a candidate for a hearing aid and the owner is willing to spend the time training, they're going to pay $3,000 for that hearing aid for that dog. And so this goes back to what we were talking about before. Many of the people that come in and they want the dog to have a hearing aid, so they've got a yellow lab or a black lab and the dog is 10 years old. Well, it's an elderly dog. How many more years is that dog actually going to live? You're going to pay $3,000 or $5,000. And by the time you work out training and getting the dog to wear the hearing aid every day, you know, how much use will you get out of it? Now, I'm not going to bilk people out of a whole bunch of money for no reason. But if we can get the hearing aid down to a very easy price, then I suspect we'll start putting more of them on dogs that pass.
Right. So Lynn had a question about when, like, I know there's certain subtle things you notice when a dog's starting to lose their hearing. So she was asking, what are more specific things that point to hearing loss versus cognitive loss, right? So they're, you know, not sure, where it's really truly a hearing loss issue, not a cognition issue. And, you know, because sometimes the cognition issue looks a lot different than the hearing issue, for sure.
Right. Well, I'll preface this by saying I'm going to give you my opinion, but you guys as trainers and handlers, and I know our behaviorists at the lab here would have some very profound things to say about that. But I can't say much if it was a truly cognitive loss. That, you know, this is a behavioral kind of a thing, which is way outside of my alley. But we find that dogs that have a hearing loss will have cognitive issues that accompany having a hearing loss, and this is true of people too. But with dogs, it's the same thing. You know, the things to look for are. And also there's a confounding too. If the dog has a loss in one ear, it's going to look cognitive because the dog won't be able to localize sound, which means that it will get confused. It will look confused. It will act confused, not because there's something cognitively wrong, but because the brain is only receiving from one side and can't make heads or tails out of what's happening in the environment. And so, you know, the best thing that I could say is, you know, you go have the dog tested to find out, is it a hearing problem or is it a cognitive problem? Now, one of the things that we have done, not often, but we have done it a little bit. We just finished doing one of my PhD students just finished doing her dissertation on this in cognition. But we were doing it in bottlenose dolphins. And so there's a test that's called mismatch negativity that we can do. And what it does is it tests the animal's echoic memory. And so we know whether or not the animal actually knows that, hey, this sound is different than this one. I've heard this before, you know, I can react to it. But again, the cognitive end, we can talk to the hearing end, but not too much to the cognitive side.
Yeah. There's, one of the things that, and I noticed that Sarah McKinley, she asked, my dog's over 11 years old and has developed very dramatic reaction to cell phone beeps, ringtones. And I have noticed this in my own German Shepherd female, that noises, dings, you know how the machines ding when you have a message or whatever. Yep. It never used to bother her. And now she jumps every time she hears those. So I have to keep my equipment with no sound, so that she won't be jumping out of her skin every time she hears those.
Right. I think either that or you have to lower the intensity of those units to something that maybe is not good for you, but it would be bad for them. This can be a problem in older dogs, which is a sign of potential presbycusis.
Yeah.
You know, now what's happened is they have certain frequencies that are either going away, or frequencies around that. Let's say your phone ringer goes off at, I don't know, 2000 hertz. If the dog has some loss below that, then yeah, 2000 hertz pulse sound, where it's going to be rapid, and then it's gone, can be frightening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So changing it to maybe a different ringtone or something else might be yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because that's what I've done. I've been changing, because if little dings and dongs that come on the computer, it alarms her to no end.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing, as she's 12, going to be 13, fireworks don't bother her as much anymore. They didn't bother her that much, but now they don't bother her at all anymore.
Yeah. So see, something like a fireworks or a gunshot, something like that, those sounds span a group of frequencies, a range of frequencies. But when you're talking about something like a cell phone thing that goes off or something like that, those are very specific frequencies. And so because they're not a broad range, what we call broadband, they're going to be more exciting to the dog, because all the other frequencies are away. You know, having a broadband where it's kind of like a washed over, the whole thing is, a lot of frequencies, then one frequency doesn't stand out amongst the rest. So they get buried, and they're not going to be as as scared about those things as they are something that produces an actual tone.
Right. Sharp. Yeah. Sharp one. And two people asked this question. Joanne, did you have one?
Yeah. So I know we have one talking about hearing loss due to like chronic ear infections. So like, Cocker Spaniels, those types of breeds, classically, Bassets or something with a long ear. Can chronic ear infections contribute to hearing loss over time?
Yes, absolutely they can. And that's why we get worried about young children about, having a lot of ear infections. Now, King Charles Spaniels, notably, are notorious for getting something called PSOM, which fills the middle ear, and usually that dog would have to go to a vet, and the vet would do a myringotomy. And the ones that I've seen where a vet at Ohio State did the myringotomy and then sent them down to me for post-hearing test, the hearing came back. However, what I know is that King Charles Spaniels, that PSOM will come back, and eventually the dog would have to go through the whole thing again, and it will lose a bit of its hearing. And every time it happens, it loses more. So yeah, you want to take good care of the dog's ear. But now this brings in something that was on the list of questions you had for me, and that is ototoxic substances. Now, in the human area, pediatricians for years, they didn't know. And so giving a kid gentamicin and things like that for your ears, we caused more hearing loss with that than we did with having the ear infection. There are a whole list, and I have the list, a partial list anyway, that I can send to you. We can email, you could share it or whatever, of ototoxic substances in veterinary medicine. And they run anything with a mycin at the end is a no-no.
Oh.
Okay? Those things are definitely ototoxic. Also, well, here's one that you probably are all familiar with: Panalog. Panalog is ototoxic. Okay, Panalog will cause hair cell damage, but Panalog and some of the other ones are only ototoxic if they are used chronically. You know, if you get a person that's squeezing Panalog in the dog's ear every day or whatever, like no, then there's going to be a problem. Some of the other ones that the mycin, like gentamicins, any of the mycins, those are galactically bad. Those you don't want to put it ever in a dog's ear, you know, because the chances that the dog will lose its hearing are very good, you know, in the future. So yeah, and then if you expose a dog to an ototoxic substance and then expose it to noise, the noise causes the hair cell loss 2 times faster.
Oh.
So how do we know this? We know this because we have police dogs and stuff that are at airports, and they bring them to the plane, and the planes are all fueled with Jet A. Jet A is ototoxic. Now, if you put that dog on the tarmac and those planes are revving up, yeah, dog's going to go deaf pretty quick.
Wow. That's interesting. Wow, that's really. There was a client of mine that the dog had an ear infection. They used the medication. He did completely lose his hearing, but after they discontinued the medication, his hearing came back. It was gradual, but he eventually came back. But it wasn't a very. I think that was a special because she didn't use it for very long. It was just for a regular, and it wasn't a chronic ear infection dog. It was just happened to have. And then he lost his hearing for a little while, and then after the medication was done, then it slowly came back, which I thought was interesting. Right.
Typically, when I've had people that have said just what you said, I'll get somebody that will email me and say, my dog just had a dental or it had something, ear problem or whatever, or it had some surgery and now the dog can't hear. In most of those cases, not all, but in most of those cases, the hearing will come back. The problem is you have to be patient. On average, it's going to take 4 to 6 weeks before the hearing begins to come back, and it will come back slowly.
Yeah.
Now, here's the rub, though. When we talk about hearing, in the biz we talk about it as a threshold. In other words, the threshold is at any particular frequency that the dog can hear. The threshold is when the dog can, at what decibel level can the dog just detect that frequency. And we have hearing curves for canines, just like we do for people. So if you go to, if we all went to a concert, Jimi Hendrix, God rest his soul, and we came out of there, an hour and a half or 2 hours later, we might all feel a little fullness in our ear, might not hear as well, might have a little ringing in the ear. The same thing happens to dogs when they're exposed to noise as well. And so what that means is we've had a temporary threshold shift, meaning the sound, in order to recognize a sound, it has to be a little bit louder than it normally would be because you have attacked the ear with the noise. And so we'll recover from it. Nancy might recover in 5 minutes. Joanne might take you half a day. I might not recover until the next day or whatever. But then you say, okay, well, then the hearing comes back. That's a temporary threshold shift. The question is, when it comes back, did it come back to what it was before the concert? The answer is never, never. So you have just incurred a hearing loss. And if you do that again, now you're incurring more of a hearing loss, and eventually over time, you will become deaf. This is why we have the federal law says that if you work in a situation of high noise and it's above 90 decibels or above, you only have 8 hours and you have to have hearing protection. Why? Because in 10 years, you will have a permanent threshold shift and you will lose your hearing and become deaf. That's exactly what can happen to a dog as well.
So this is why you're saying too, by the time most most pet owners notice they've lost enough that you can't get it back, right? It never comes back, so you can't help that. Too far gone.
That's right. That's right. If the dog doesn't have enough residual hearing, like it has a moderate loss, yeah, the hearing aid will help. If it's a severe loss, no hearing aid in the world is going to help that dog.
Okay. Interesting.
Um,
So Jennifer's asking, are you the only canine audiologist to exam and make hearing aids for dogs in the U.S.?
Presently, we are the only ones that do hearing aids in the world.
yeah, in the world.
We told you he was a special guest.
Right, I mean, it's nothing special, you know. Honestly, it's nothing special. It's just that, you know, because all the people that, you know, my students that work for me and work with me and the other colleagues, you know, most of them are audiologists, so they're dealing with humans and hearing aids all the time. And so as soon as somebody, I don't know who got a hold of this, and we did that first dog, it was like the door opened and, you know, people started to kick down the door. I am not the first person that ever put a hearing aid on a dog. The first hearing aids that were ever put on was by, I think, a guy at Auburn University. And he stopped. He just, you know, didn't want to do it anymore for whatever the reason. We've picked up on that over the years now. And so, but it's dicey. I mean, if you're not an audiologist, certainly a veterinarian is not going to be able to deal with hearing aids and they don't know enough, you know, and that's not their fault. They're just not trained. But if you're an audiologist, you know, then you know enough about hearing aids to be able to deal with it. But we're the only ones that deal with animals.
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons we were so interested, Joanne and I, is as trainers, hearing loss is a thing that we deal with. And since it's not a very, like you said, it's at the bottom of the list of importance, people don't believe it. They're like, oh, it's just it's like, no. Well, it's not blowing you up. He can't hear you.
Yeah, exactly.
Difficulty. But it's one of those things that I you know, you notice it, you're like, oh, and especially like vision loss too. When you live with the dog, or the dog is in a familiar environment, it navigates its world pretty well. But when you take them out of that natural environment into another environment, then you can start to see why the dog isn't focused or paying attention, because can't see or you can't hear, or you know. So and then they're like, oh, because in some cases you can't train it because it's not anything that is caused by. It's not a behavior problem.
Oh, yeah.
It's a physical problem. So
yeah, well, and you guys all know better, way better than I do, you know, that if you own a deaf dog, the dog's behavior obviously is going to change, but also the owner's behavior has to change, because deaf dogs are not like regular dogs, and
right.
And there's nothing to be afraid of as far as I can tell. I think there's a lot of bad mythology out there about, you know, deaf dogs, and you know, ranging from a deaf dog is going to get hit by a car. Well, it is if you let your dog run around free and you're not dealing with leash laws. But you know, but yeah, I mean, and yeah, again, it's not much different than people. Years ago, I taught high school students at the American School for the Deaf in West Hartford, Connecticut. And, you know, so these are all kids that are profoundly deaf. And so you have to know that behavior is going to be different. It's going to be different for your dog. And you can see, I'm sure you guys have seen all the signs. Deaf dogs will generally try to stick where they can feel you, or they'll lay across the threshold of a door so that they know when their people are moving in and out, you know, to the sublime. So with our dog, when he finally became so deaf that he couldn't, and we had a deaf Aussie that was deaf, congenitally deaf, we use American Sign Language.
Yeah.
Dogs work very well with it, but as you guys probably know better than I do, even any kind of hand signaling, or, you know, there are just things that you do. And that falls, you know, that falls more into, you know, it's into your guys's, you know, toolbox than mine. I can only say, yeah, the dog is deaf or it's not. But yeah.
Because you can't train it. Just now they have vibration collars that helps with recalls, and you can use. I've used light to train, flashlight to train
Absolutely.
really, really well, and they have a very full life, like you said, without being able to hear. Dr. Lagaitis asked a question. She says she tried to do bear testing in this area, Illinois, to find if there's a specific frequency that her dog can hear to allow her to find a whistle appropriate for him. He's almost 13, and he's got diminished hearing. He's been whistle trained for field work, but is not hearing the whistle. Is there such a test available can help with different frequencies?
Yes, it depends on what equipment you are using. It's some equipment, like there's a thing called a BearCom, which you can't really do much with. You use it, and it gives you a waveform, and you look at it, and it's either looks right to you or not. We don't tend to use those. If you're using a unit like intelligent hearing systems, or a biologic unit, or an inner acoustic unit, those are made for doing not only human infants, but also in hospital settings. And so there's a lot you can do with those, because you can change all the parameters. And one of the things that you would change is, instead of using a click stimulus, you would use a gated tone burst. And those units will allow you to select the frequency and tell the unit you want to use a gated tone burst, and then you can test. So the dogs that we've done so far that have been the border collies, we have the person come in with their whistle, and then we open an acoustic program. We record them blowing into the whistle the different commands, and then that's how we determine what frequency the whistle is actually going off at. Now, some packages will tell you that if you just do blowing it one time, but if you're doing multiple frequencies, then you have to kind of do this. Once you know what the frequency of the whistle is, then you can run that frequency on the dog as a gated tone burst bear test, and then you'll know whether the dog can hear it or not. And if it can't, then you run gated tone burst frequencies on either side of the one that the whistle is at, and that will tell you what whistle you have to buy for what frequency you need to get to take the place of the one that you're using. And most times that'll solve the problem.
So you're the only one that does the hearing tests in the US for dogs right now. You said that's correct, right? So if somebody wants a hearing test, they'd have to contact you.
No. So there
Come on, everybody. No.
So this bear test, which in human audiology we call an ABR, the bear test, there are any number of veterinarians or people that can run a bear test. Mm-hmm. If you go online to Google and look up, bear test sites, which is the list is kept by Dr. George Strain at Louisiana State University. You'll find, I think there's probably right now maybe 75 sites across America that do that. But here's the kick. Most of those sites are not doing diagnostic testing. They're doing a bear screening, which is a puppy screening.
Right.
Okay. The puppy screening is not going to give you the information for an older dog that's going to tell you what threshold each ear is at. To that, you would have to have the kind of equipment that we have, where you can actually do what's called a stacked ABR or a diagnostic ABR threshold estimation. And I don't know, I'm guessing that there are not very many sites that actually have the capacity to run that. They all run screenings. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that we're the only one. I've not seen a whole lot of other places that actually can run threshold estimations, or the other test that goes with it, which is an otoacoustic emission.
So is that one of the goals for FETCHLAB, to try to bring this? Because I'll be honest, hearing for training is really important, right? It's just those are things that are just not, people don't think about it. So is that one of the goals of FETCHLAB, is maybe to possibly make it more commonplace?
Yes. So my first goal, which is what I originally, was talking about, is we are the FETCHLAB at the University of Cincinnati and my FETCHLAB that's at the University of Northern Colorado are both places where a person can go, an audiologist can go to get certified in animal audiology. So they have to be a people audiology first.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first goal that I have is to try to get more animal audiologists into the veterinary community to assist veterinarians specifically with hearing. Having said that, then when they get trained to get the certificate, to get certified, they go through all of that. Having said that, I'm hoping that in the future, that and the fact that we have more and more universities, like Arizona right now is going through their process to become a FETCHLAB, that this will happen more and more, and that the more that we have, the more audiologists that have the certification will be out there to be able to offer their services to veterinarians and say, look, if you have, I don't know, maybe once a month I come and we do all the hearing screenings or whatever you need to have happen. So yeah, I'm hoping that audiology will take a rightful place in the veterinary community.
So how does FETCHLAB function? Is it by grants, donations? How does it keep going on?
The big research work that happens through grants. A lot of my work is funded by the Department of Defense. So the hearing aid work, we have a very gracious donor who is giving us an endowment to do the hearing aid work. As far as the regular day-to-day, so when a military base needs to have a audiologist for their dog, that's what I was talking about before. Having retired from Uncle Sam, but Uncle Sam decided that no, I'm not going to. Right. So when they need me to go to a base, they come to the university and say, needs of the nation, he's got to go, and then I go. Other than that, the lab functions. I don't ask anything from the university at all. I mean, like I say, I'm booked all the way into February. And a lot of it is backup because when COVID came down, we got shut down and, people couldn't get their puppies tested. And as soon as they found out that FETCHLAB, we were being opened on a limited basis by the university, the floodgates let go. And, so all my consumables and things that I need to run the lab come from, the clients that come in to have their dogs tested.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. Well, yeah, because it's like I think like I'm very, very interested in the hearing, and Joanne and I have talked about a lot because we've seen it, not a lot, but we've seen enough dogs that have came in for training for behavior issues that turned out to be hearing problems. Not so much of a behavior issue. Lisa had a question. Do you see that, Joanne?
I do. So I'm very happy. A Dalmatian person tuned in tonight. So she says all the puppies are bear tested, and if they're shown as deaf in one ear or the other, can they still have hearing of some sort, different frequencies, or how does that work if they are shown as deaf in one ear?
Okay. So when it comes to deafness, so this is where we have to sort out the thing. So the dog can have a hearing loss. Hearing loss might be mild, it might be moderate, or it might be severe. If they're tested as puppies, they're tested to find out if they are profoundly deaf. If they are profoundly deaf, there is nothing in the world that you can do about it. They're not going to hear any particular frequency. They're just like a person. They are profoundly deaf. So, and the bear test, and I'm sure this lady is very familiar, Lisa's very familiar with the Orthopedic Foundation for Animals, which is where who archives all of the testing screenings. When you do a screening, it's a go, no-go test. You provide the dog with a stimulus that is very loud, and either the dog hears or it doesn't. If it doesn't hear it, then the puppy is deaf. And but then the puppy could be bilaterally deaf, both ears, or unilaterally deaf, one ear. But deaf is deaf. If it's profound, whether it's bilateral or unilateral, that's the end of the road.
Okay. So there's nothing they can do for that. Mhm.
Nope.
So Lisa, I hope he answered your question. So I just had one more here. Do you recommend, as Nancy said, your normal Joe Schmo pet owner, do you recommend anyone do just a hearing test on their dog? Like just to come to you to say, hey, my dog's 6, just want you to test their hearing?
Well, we get people that do that. Most of the time what happens is the dog is elderly. And that's when people will come in and say, I think my dog is hearing, but I'm not really sure. I'd like to be sure. So they come in and, we do a hearing test for them. I think if you have an elderly dog and you have any signs that you feel are a little not right, that you can go to hearing or maybe think might have to do with hearing for an elderly dog, yeah, go have it tested and you'll find out exactly what you need to know. Now, having said that, I have to say this. So, in the old days, when person wanted to find out whether it was a professional veterinarian or the owner or whatever, you want to find out if the dog is deaf, which most people didn't. Jangle keys or bang a pot or something like that, And so that is not a hearing test. You can't rely on that.
Right.
And here's the rub. So we get some people that come in and we test their dogs and we say the dog is bilaterally deaf, can't hear. Okay. And so, like a couple of days later, they'll phone me up or email me and say, look, we were watching TV the other night and I sneezed and the dog, alerted to it. Or, I yelled across the house or I dropped the plate or something like that. Look, if we did audiology like that for people, the world would drop dead. Okay. It's not. So here's the thing you have to remember. Especially one of the sensations, and we all know that, the primary sensation of a canine is scenting, not hearing and not sight. But why does this happen? Because just like deaf people, if your dog is profoundly deaf, it will be extremely sensitive to any kind of vibration. If you cough or you sneeze, that dog just got the vibration. It did not categorically hear your sound. And so it might pop its head up. It might, look around like I'm not really sure what's happening, but it's all the sensation, which is why jangling keys and things like that is not a good test for hearing for a canine. You got to get a bear test done. It's the only thing that is actually more or less foolproof.
Wow. Is there if people feel like making a road trip to Cincinnati for a hearing test, do they just look up FETCHLAB? Is that how they?
Yeah. So FETCHLAB has a website. If they go on the University of Cincinnati's thing, or I can send it to you by email, and you can put it out. I'm 32 times an imbecile when it comes to Facebook and stuff like that. So you can't rely on me for any of that, but I can certainly email. But yeah, they can contact either me by email or the FETCHLAB has a site and it has a thing that you fill out about, how old are your puppies? How old is your dog? You just fill it out. And then it gets sent off to the managers of my lab, and then they will work with you to schedule an appointment.
Yeah. So Jennifer asked if you have a dog that tends to be prone to ear infection, it's just better to take her to an audiologist if there is one, or the regular vet for treatment and or prevention.
So yeah. So I'm glad she asked this question, because this is a very fine line. When we do animal audiology, and specifically with domestic animals like dogs, we cannot practice veterinary medicine. That's a no bueno. That's no. So I cannot do anything with regard to the ear infection. Your veterinarian needs to be taking care of that. What I can do is that work with the veterinarian, or after, when the veterinarian has given you the treatment, to preserve the hearing and get things back on track with the dog's hearing. And that means that, let's say the dog, it's like I said, the King Charles Spaniel. So they have PSOM. They go in and get a myringotomy. Now they're going to recover from the surgery, and so initially, no, they're not going to hear. And so people will come, and I'll say, look, let's wait 4 weeks. I'll put you on the schedule. You come in, and then we start to see the hearing come back. And that could be the same thing for any treatment that your vet will give the dog. And if the vet can't do a bear test, then you go and you have the dog bear tested, and eventually the hearing's going to come back. But that's where the audiology comes in, not in the treatment of the ear.
Okay. All right.
It sounds kind of, in a nutshell, if you want to know if your dog is deaf or not, a simple bear test could tell you that, right? If you want to know,
an OFA screening will do it.
Okay, but the frequencies or hearing loss or how to help prevent that or get it back, that is where you would see the FETCHLAB or audiology.
Right, yeah. Then you need a diagnostic, and you need a threshold estimation and an Oae test. An Oae test, very quickly, is a test that no veterinarian that I know has the equipment to do this, but all dogs, all mammals, have an otoacoustic emission. So if you've ever been sitting very quietly and suddenly hear a high-pitched tone in your ear,
yes,
yeah, that's your otoacoustic emission. You're supposed to have it, okay? What that is the hair cells in your inner ear are moving, and they produce a sound that comes back out of the canal. And so when we test for otoacoustic emission, what we're testing is to see that the hair cells are operative and the middle ear is operative. That's what an OAE does. The bear test tests everything else in the hearing system, all the way up to the end of the central auditory system. So when we do a diagnostic, we're doing an OAE and we're doing a threshold estimation bear, and we know what's happening. But that would be, a diagnostic for, I think my dog can't hear, or my dog's 12 years old, or whatever. I don't know.
Right. Oh, wow. This is great.
This has been amazing. Yes.
So, Doctor, we're going to sign off, but we're going to say goodbye to all our friends. Thank you so much for you guys for tuning in. We'll see you soon. Like our Facebook page, For Your Canine, or For Better For Worse. We have lots of stuff coming up in the new year. So hopefully you guys can join us. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.